on the air with a new batch of Biden documents, a story our team here at NBC News broke first. A separate set of classified documents found by the president's team. What we know and what's still not clear as the White House press secretary gets into a spicy back and forth with reporters on the whole thing late today. Then the evening fallout from that morning meltdown at airports across the country tonight. What went wrong in that big FAA glitch that grounded planes, and the domino effect that's still nowhere near over. We're live at one of the world's busiest airports. We're also getting some new reaction today from students at the University of Idaho, returning to campus for the first time since the arrest of a suspect in the murder of 4 of their classmates. What else we're finding out now about the alleged killer? Plus, a debate catching fire, literally, why some Republicans are up in arms about a federal agency's idea to address some of the health risks by gas stoves. We've got a reality check. We'll also hear from one woman a little later on in the show who's going the extra mile and then a couple hundred more to lower the cost of her prescription drugs. That's in the original in a bit. Hey, I'm Hallie, and breaking right before we came on the air tonight, NBC News is exclusively reporting that aides to President Biden have found at least one more batch of classified documents in a separate location. Now, a second location that is different from the D.C. office where the first batch was found, according to a person familiar with the matter. So here's what we know. The Biden aides have been doing this thorough search for any other classified materials that may be in other places. That first batch, fewer than a dozen documents based on what sources are telling us. And now we can report on that second batch. But here's what we don't know about that second batch: the classification level, the number of documents, where specifically they were found and when. And the White House hasn't responded to NBC's request for comment on this latest reporting. They're actually not talking much at all beyond what they've already said. With the White House press briefing today getting a little tense, with Karine Jean-Pierre dodging reporters' questions about that first batch of docs. Watch.
I'm not going to go beyond what the president laid out. I'm not going to go beyond what my White House counsel colleagues have stated. I want to be prudent here. I want to make sure that we do this in the appropriate way.
We're going to ask them because that's our job.
I understand, and my job is to answer your questions. So here we go. Let's go.
All of this is happening as other sources tell NBC. Attorney General Merrick Garland has been briefed on the investigation, and it's come to the point where he has enough info now to make a final decision on how to move forward. Let me bring in now Ken Delanian, who's one of the members of our teams who broke this story about a second batch of documents. Tell us more about it, Ken, and what it means big picture.
Well, Hallie, our understanding is that after the initial discovery of this first batch of less than a dozen documents back 6 days before the midterm elections in November, the Biden team began conducting a series of searches at various other locations, sort of scrubbing for any other possible classified documents that they didn't know about that might be squirreled away in boxes somewhere that were packed after the end of the Obama administration, and that they found some in at least one location, at least an additional batch. There's holes in what we know. You laid them out very well. But so it doesn't really tell us. It doesn't answer important questions about whether this should become a criminal investigation, because it says nothing about motive or the circumstances under which these documents were sent to the wrong place. But it does underscore that this is becoming a bigger political headache for the Biden administration, and the way they're responding is perplexing to me. Because if this was merely an inadvertent disclosure, some documents ended up at the wrong place, somebody packed the wrong stuff in a box, why not just get it all out there, rip the Band-Aid off? Now, it may be that the White House counsel's office and some other lawyers are saying we must be cautious because there's a chance the Justice Department is going to open a criminal investigation, and then, we shouldn't be talking about this stuff. But if it's all so innocent, it's perplexing that the White House is saying nothing about this, Hallie.
The other piece of this, Ken, as you do cover the Department of Justice for us here, Ken, and the DOJ, is that the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, as you point out, is going to make this determination on how this moves forward. We know on the Hill side of things that House Republicans want investigations. We're even seeing late today the top 2 senators on the Intelligence Committee, Senator Warner and Rubio, right? Mark Warner, Democrat, Marco Rubio, Republican, who want what's called a damage assessment. They want to get a sense of what's actually in some of these documents, presumably both batches now, as we're reporting. How does this play out in the building that you cover, DOJ, as well as on the Hill?
Well, that's 2 separate issues. So it's the DNI,
Sure
Director of National Intelligence, that would have to brief those senators, and they want to know whether there was any compromise of national security, plain and simple, quite apart from how the documents got out. In this building, in the Justice Department, they are reviewing whether it's appropriate to open a criminal investigation and basically name another special counsel to investigate this matter. And that decision is going to land in the lap of the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. And I'm told that he will, when he announces one way or another what the decision is, he will explain the facts and circumstances of this case that's already become public. So he's able to do that. And that's a huge issue in this building. And it could come imminently, Hallie.
Ken Delaney in live for us on this developing story. Ken, thank you very much for that reporting. The White House tonight is saying that right now they still really don't know why some important FAA software failed. A meltdown leading to a breakdown at airports across the country. Tons of delays. Look at this. Tons of cancellations everywhere, even tonight as we speak. You're looking at some of the biggies. Washington, Chicago, Tampa, Newark. People just hanging out, waiting. As we walk to the studio, there have been 9,000 delays, 1,300 cancellations. So here's what we know. You're looking at it right now. This whole thing was caused by a glitch to NOTAM, this computer system that basically gives pilots the info they need about the airports they're going to. When that goes down, you cannot fly in a commercial plane, right? They cannot be in the air, just private planes. So this glitch grounded a bunch of flights for nearly 2 hours. A senior law enforcement official tells NBC News the FBI has no evidence this was from a cyber attack. But that brings us to what we do not know, because the Department of Transportation is still looking at the root of this whole thing. And the Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, says he is not fully ruling out a cyber attack yet. We don't know how long it's going to take for these delays to get better. People tonight are like begging to get home or get where they're going. TBD on that. And is anybody going to pay for the people who are stuck? Or is this just considered an act of God, meaning you're out of luck? Here's what we're hearing.
It's always a little bit discombobulating just to refigure things.
I have school tomorrow, so I have to change my flight to tomorrow morning, and I have classes that day.
I hope they at least add some snacks or a meal or something in there. I'm hungry.
Blaine, let's get him a snack, please. Blaine
too.
Alexander is at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta. We've also got our aviation expert and correspondent on transportation, Tom Costello, with me here on set. Blaine, let me start with you. One of the busiest airports in the world where you are. And even though this stuff happened in the morning, the ripple effects are being felt tonight, even into tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Hallie, as you know, we've been watching this all day. So what we have seen is the number of delays here in and out of Atlanta has been ticking up steadily throughout the day. When I last talked with you a couple of hours ago over on MSNBC, the number of delays in and out of this airport were hovering just under 800 or so. I just checked within the last 2 minutes. They're now at 828. So we're talking about a several dozen increase, but that's certainly higher than what we saw at the beginning of the day. So yes, that is the true definition of ripple effects. And of course, as the world's busiest airport, they're really feeling it here. One thing I want to point out, though, is the average length of that delay in and out of Atlanta. It's only about 37 minutes. So we're not talking about hours-long delay for the vast majority of people. Certainly not to minimize that, because that could be the difference between making or missing a connecting flight. And we've heard people with those stories as well. But I think it's important to point out that we're talking about less than an hour of the delays that we're seeing here, Hallie.
That's a good point, Blaine. That's good context. Tom, that said, there's other context we should get into here, too, right? Like some of the meltdowns in the airline industry over just the past 18 months. We're about to put it up on screen here. All those bags that went missing in London, for example, last summer. Southwest Christmas catastrophe, I think you could fairly call it. A computer glitch grounded flights in Florida just last week. Now there's this. Can you give me a sense, based on the people that you're talking to in the inside government, outside of it, experts, et cetera, like, what does this say about how we should be feeling and trusting as far as our air travel infrastructure?
I think, listen, it's understandable that all of us would be a little cautious when we have to fly, thinking, oh, boy, will I have a delay? Will I have an issue?
Am I going to end up on the news with Blaine Alexander, you know?
Listen, it's always possible something happens. And I think the problem is we've got a lot of individual instances, right? But they're not all connected. That's the thing. They're not. This was not an airline problem. This was an FAA computer glitch problem, right? You can't blame the airlines for this. And, you know, you had asked, is it possible that people get compensated for their meals or for their hotels? Nope. That's not going to happen. This was not the airline's problem. Right. This will be considered an act of God, as you suggested, and so the government's not going to give your money back. They got to get to the bottom of what caused this operational glitch, and I got to tell you, my sources are leaning towards a software problem of some sort. Yeah. By the way, guess what? The Canadian NOTAM system also went down today. It also went down today. But they insist it's not connected to the U.S. system, although there is some commonality there because flights go across the border constantly. We share that information. I think they've got to determine whether they've got some common software glitch. At the moment, they don't think it's a cyber attack, but clearly nothing's off the table.
I was asking this very question, Blaine, to the top Democrat on the House Transportation Committee, Congressman Rick Larson. He's like, I want a briefing from the DOT. As soon as they know more, I want to know more. Watch. What does this say about how Americans should feel as it relates to trust in air travel infrastructure and accountability for the air travel infrastructure?
I think that people should, I hope they see that this decision made to go to a ground stop, a full ground stop, is made out of safety first.
So, Blaine, what is the vibe you're getting from people there, right, as you're on the ground talking to folks?
You know what? Everyone's got a different travel story, and everyone has a different way of dealing with it, Hallie. So it depends on who you ask. Certainly, I've talked to some people both today, and when you talk about that Southwest travel nightmare of a couple of weeks ago, people who said, you know what, I'm done with it. I'm frustrated. This is a nightmare, and I'm sick of the delays. But most of the people that we're hearing from today really are taking it in stride. They kind of almost take it as an occupational hazard of, you know what, you book a ticket on a flight, and there's a good chance it could be delayed. Here's one of those people. Take a look.
It's all airlines, so what do you do?
Right.
So the best thing is, because we're almost here, get on the line and see what they could do to help us. And they helped us, so we're very happy.
So because most of the people, Hallie, that we've heard from have been able to get rebooked today, we haven't seen that tremendous level of frustration. But again, it certainly runs across the board when you talk about how people are dealing with this.
Blaine, Alexander, Tom Casella, thanks very much to the both of you for that great reporting. Appreciate it. We are just now learning that California Governor Gavin Newsom has spoken tonight with President Biden about those devastating storms hitting the state. 18 people are dead now. This system, this weather system, is causing floods and mudslides. It is literally sweeping children away. There's a missing 5-year-old boy. We told you about him yesterday, who got swept away in these floodwaters. His dad is opening up about just how horrific this has been. Listen.
We haven't gotten definitive answers, and it's tough because I would love to have him back.
It's not just rain, but snow that's slamming the mountains. Look at this town. Some places have already reached the average snow total for the season 3 months early. The rest of the state is getting a little bit of a weather break today, but really all that means is they have an opportunity to clean up or start cleaning up some of the terrible mess. And it's not going to last long. They're going to get hit again this weekend. I want to bring in Marissa Parra, who's in Sonoma County, for us. Talk about the concern for people there as they are just dealing with this over and over and over again. No real end to the storms in sight here.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear a parade of cyclones, you know that is a bad omen for the state of California. So just to give you a sense of where we are right now, you mentioned that we're in Sonoma County. This is the Russian River behind me. And as people around here know, there are no strangers to seeing flooding. So there were some flooding concerns. I want to show you those signs over there. Just gives you a little bit of perspective about how high the water level is right now. This is about 10 times what they were seeing over the summer. You can't even see the bottom half of that sign, which normally you can walk up to. This is supposed to be a beach. And so because this is an area that is prone to flooding, they did evacuate this trailer park that's right next to me. We spoke to a woman. She talked about the stress of that. Now, they're not seeing the flooding that they were afraid of seeing, but these things are so hard to predict, right? And we did see that just a few miles away from where we are right now, there was another person who was found dead. This was someone who was inside of a submerged vehicle. The water had just overtaken it yesterday. They unfortunately discovered the vehicle with the person inside. So that leads us to now 18 confirmed people who have died from this storm system that has just been pummeling California. And when we talk about the impacts, it's not just the rain, it's the wind coupled with that that's causing trees to topple on top of it, on top of houses, on top of cars, and then the landslides, the mudslides. So, Hallie, you know, this is really just costly in every single way, both dollars and cents and with lives.
And the loss of life, the people who are dying, it's horrific to think about as you look at this, Marissa, and it just feels like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back as it relates to even just the push to try to clean up. That's tough for crews, tough for people to make progress on.
Right, absolutely. I mean, how are you supposed to make progress when the rain continues to fall down? I mean, even when we were in Santa Cruz yesterday, we were watching people trying to scoop and shovel the mud out of their driveway, but then the rain kept falling and the mud was spreading everywhere. So, you know, it's been really hard on the electric crews. You got to remember all the PG&E, that's the local electric company for a lot of the area, and they're trying to restore power to the hundreds of thousands that were without it as of yesterday. Those were the numbers that we were seeing, and we know that that number has gone down, but still, and when we talk about the efforts to find this little boy, they had to halt the efforts because the rain was relentless. Thankfully, further south where he went missing, they were able to resume because they are getting a break. But again, here in the Pacific Northwest, this rain still coming down, so this is not over yet, Hallie.
Marissa Parra, live for us there in Northern California. Marissa, thank you very much. Just before we came on the air, House Republicans and one House Democrat passed an anti-abortion bill called the Born Alive Bill, this new regulation where health care providers would be mandated to give life-saving care to infants born alive after an attempted abortion. It's just one of a handful of bills that would limit abortion access. Another big issue for House Republicans, immigration, those two issues that House Republicans are likely to focus on here. Keep in mind, there are two chambers in Congress. Right? So, yes, it's got through the House. The Senate, very different scenario. Democrats have a slim majority. They're almost certainly going to vote no on all those bills. So you may be thinking, then what's the point of the House even bringing this stuff up if it's not going to go anywhere? They're called messaging bills. It's about making a point come 2024 about where the parties stand on these issues. And by the way, not all Republicans think it's a good idea to be taking these messaging bills now. I want to bring in Hallie Vitale. And Hallie, the abortion bill we're talking about today focuses on late-term abortions. Some context here, they are extremely rare. I think something like 1% of abortions in this country. It was technically bipartisan. One Democrat, Texas's Henry Cuellar, who has been very vocal about his position on abortion, joined Republicans here. But then you have some House Republicans coming out, Nancy Mace among them, and saying, politically speaking, Republicans shouldn't be doing this right now.
Yeah, and even with Congresswoman Mace saying that, she still voted, as all Republicans did, on this bill and its companion bill that basically protects crisis pregnancy centers, which are notorious for mis and disinformation around pregnancy and abortion. But the reason that Mace is saying it's not a politically smart bill is because of the exit polls that we saw out of the 2022 midterms. Remember, and I know you know this well, the landscape in 2022 could not have been better in theory for Republicans. They had history on their side because usually whoever holds the White House faces a shellacking in their first midterm elections. Then also we saw that polling had things like the economy and crime front and center. But abortion was the thread from the moment that that leaked decision came out of the Supreme Court on the Dobbs decision all the way through November that seemed to be galvanizing voters. And it's because more than 6 in 10, or roughly 6 in 10 Americans believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Republicans represent restrictions on abortion, and Democrats were trying to make it accessible. This is one of the few issues where there is a clear distinction between the parties, and that's what voters seem to be voting on, and a large reason why Democrats say they did so well in the 2022 midterms, and why people like Nancy Mace, despite still voting for this bill, are warning that it might not be the politically smart move here.
Talk about the 2024 implications, okay, and about the piece of that looks beyond just Congress and the Hill in this current moment.
Look, the goal for Republicans is a week into having the gavel, 2 weeks into having the gavel and control of this chamber, they want to show Americans what their priorities are. That's why they're doing this messaging bill. That's why they'll follow it with immigration. It's why the important pieces of the speaker battle and the negotiations done there tell Americans what the priorities of this conference are, and it's spending and other social issues like this one. So the fact that this is a week one issue is really important, and it's meant to highlight for the American public what they get with a Republican majority in the House. This is just one of those features.
Hallie Vitale, live for us on the Hill. Hallie, thank you very much. To a potential sign of hope now, right? A maybe silver lining for people who lost a lot of money when FTX, that crypto exchange, collapsed. Lawyers are laying out some new details tonight about missing money in a Delaware bankruptcy court. They say FTX has gotten back at least $5 billion in what they call liquid assets. That's like cash, that's crypto, et cetera, securities. That's more than halfway to the $8 billion that the company says is missing. So you're, okay, at least that's something, right? Now, this doesn't include the $425 million the SEC has on hold in the Bahamas. That's where ex-CEO Sam Bankman-Fried lived before this total meltdown, right? He was arrested, hit with 8 federal fraud and conspiracy charges. CNBC's Eamon Javers has been following this hearing for us today. Worth reminding people, this company was valued at $32 billion before dropping to zero in like basically a week. And while we know that the FTX owes money to its customers, we don't know how much it owes the banks it got money from, et cetera. Talk to us about what people can expect. If you lost money in the collapse, are you going to get it back?
Not this week, and not anytime soon, Hallie. There's going to be a long bankruptcy proceeding here. They had a hearing in Wilmington, Delaware today. It does not look like this is going to be resolved anytime soon. It's just a massive, massive case. And you call it a silver lining, and that might be right. I mean, that they found this $5 billion. The attorneys said today in court they can point to $5 billion of liquid assets that they can access. That's a good thing. But it's a thin silver lining because the attorneys also said that the improper line of credit from FTX to Alameda, that was Sam Bankman-Fried's hedge fund, basically. That improper line of credit, they said, was up to $65 billion, and they said they just have not finished figuring out where all that money went. A lot of it was spent and might be able to be clawed back. A lot of it might simply be gone and unable to be clawed back for the customers they owe money to. So it's not at all clear here who's going to get paid back and how much they're going to get paid back. So if you had money on this exchange, you could be waiting a while, and you might not get 100 cents on the dollar.
There's human drama around so much of this, right? Not just people who have, like, you know, financial stake in what's happening here, but from Sam Bankman-Fried himself, SBF. And I mean, we've talked about this on this show, in the hallways here in the building and in Washington, right? Like the idea that SBF just keeps talking. He was in all this legal trouble. He kept talking. He is still talking in this new interview with Puck News. Teddy Schleifer going on the record with him for the first time since SBF got put under house arrest here in this country. And what's so interesting is, you know, he's framing it like SBF is saying, what I can do is limited. He's trying to like position himself in this. Teddy's takeaway was kind of that he feels SBF knows he needs to look contrite. And it's not that he doesn't believe it, but it's more that SBF knows he's supposed to look that way. And it can be tough to listen to his apologies and recovery plans without feeling like you're watching a performance.
Yeah, look, I mean, he is a guy who clearly had a public-facing strategy as a CEO of this company, right? He slapped the logo of his company on the Miami Heat arena down in Miami, Florida. That, by the way, they decided today that logo's coming off. They voided that contract. But that was he wanted to be as high profile as possible. He talked to the media all the time before the fall. He was very visible in the crypto community. He was luring as many customers in as he could. And he's still doing that, even though his company has crashed and burned, and he is being blamed by the current management for disastrous internal management, if not criminal activity, inside the company. He is somebody who has decided that, you know, the donations to the politicians, the naming rights on the stadium, all of that worked before the crash. Maybe that kind of thing can work after the crash and still continue to spin and tell your story to the public. That's clearly the campaign that he's on. It's the exact opposite of what any corporate lawyer would advise you to do in his position.
Yeah, which would be, most corporate lawyers would say, like, mute yourself, I think graciously is what I would put it.
Shut it.
Shut it. Eamon Javers,
you can do yourself a lot of damage.
Yeah, seriously. Eamon, thank you. Appreciate it. To Idaho tonight, where University of Idaho students are opening up as they're coming back to campus today for the very first day of the spring semester, with a suspect now in the murder of 4 classmates behind bars. This arrest has brought some relief to campus, but you've still got a lot of anxiety here. You've got students walking in pairs. Some are having mace with them. Some are taking self-defense classes. The suspected killer is going to be in court tomorrow for a status hearing with more questions about a motive, whether or not he knew his victims. Steve Patterson is joining us live now. And Steve, the trauma of what happened is still so raw for so many people at the campus behind you there.
You know, Hallie, I spoke to students this afternoon. I would say it's a mixed bag. And look, in some ways, this campus, this community, this town is never going to be the same. They are never going to be fully normal, but they're doing what they can. And there's a little bit of relief. I can tell you one thing, that when I was here about 3 or 4 weeks ago, it is a far cry from that. I mean, a lot of the stress, the anxiety, the fear that was permeating in this community has been alleviated with the announcement that there is a suspect in custody, that police not only have a suspect in custody, but they absolutely believe that this is the sole person responsible for those murders. That has gone a long way, but as you mentioned, a lot of students here remain vigilant, and a lot of them remain sad. These were people that were, part of this community, and again, this is a community that may never go back to being normal, at least not for the time being. So I spoke to those students. Here's what they told me about just how they feel coming back to class. Listen to this.
Even if, the trial process goes through, he gets convicted and stuff like that, there's still 4 students who lost their lives, and there's nothing that can, bring that back. So it's hard.
It doesn't feel as cheerful as it usually is, I would say. It definitely has a bit more dark and depressing kind of vibe going on.
That darkness is here. It's also at Washington State University, very nearby, and that's where Kohberger attended classes. Both campuses feeling it, but again, there's a little bit less of that tension in the air here today. Hallie?
Steve Patterson. Steve, I just want to note, too, there is another campus that is affected here, Washington State University, where the suspected killer was taking classes. And we are now hearing from classmates there as well, right? And there's some really, I think, noteworthy things that they're saying.
Yeah, students that were classmates with Kohberger in one of those criminology classes described to that paper how he acted. And it's kind of surprising. He was gregarious, they say. He was the center of a lot of these topics that they covered in class. He loved the subject of criminology, was front and center in class. But there are a few chilling things that go along with it. One is that this is a guy that used to lead conversations. And when the conversation turned to the murders here in Idaho, he was absolutely silent. Two is that he was, maybe unduly a little bit harsher to women when they raised topics in class. So 2 things to watch for from that paper. But, as far as the circumstances around what we're all looking for, which is a motive, that may come a whole lot later in this case, Hallie. Back to
Steve
you.
Patterson, live for us there in Idaho. Steve, thank you. Coming up, we are just hearing from Demar Hamlin's coach and his teammates after Hamlin was released from the hospital after going into cardiac arrest last week. We'll take a look at the next steps in his recovery. Plus, Naomi Osaka's withdrawal from the Australian Open shocked fans over the weekend. Well, now we're learning more about why she's missing it. That's in our 5 things. Some sad breaking news to report. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame guitarist Jeff Beck has died from what his family says was a short bout with bacterial meningitis. Beck is a legendary guitarist, 8 Grammy Awards to his name, an innovator in rock and blues. He's so good, he's actually in the Hall of Fame twice, as a member of the Yardbirds and with his own group. Rolling Stone puts him in the top 5 of the greatest guitarists ever. Jeff Beck was 78 years old. We'll take you now to Buffalo, where we are hearing from the Bills today after they're finding out this morning that their safety, Demar Hamlin, has been released from the hospital. He is out of the hospital now 9 days after going into cardiac arrest on the field during Monday Night Football in Cincinnati. Head coach Sean McDermott, if you can believe it, is even talking about when Hamlin might end up rejoining the team. Listen.
His health is first and foremost on our mind as far as his situation goes. And then when he feels ready, we welcome him back.
Hamlin's doctors say they released him today after he passed a bunch of tests and evaluations. He'd spent almost a week in a Cincinnati ICU before getting transferred back to Buffalo. Ron Allen is joining us now. And Ron, we talked about a milestone when Demar Hamlin was able to get on a plane and go from Cincinnati to Buffalo. What an even more incredible milestone that he is able now to be home outside of the hospital. What does recovery there look like for him?
I think it looks like a lot of physical therapy, a lot of occupational therapy, and a very slow process. The doctors are saying that it's still too early to speculate when he might have a, quote, normal life. And as far as returning to football in his career, they say that that discussion is significantly in the future. So, and doctors, of course, are conservative, but the bottom line is that he still has a lot of work to do. Yes, he was able to leave the hospital. Yes, he is able to walk in a normal way. He's able to eat regular foods. But he's still apparently very weak, needs to get a lot of strength back. Yeah. And so it's going to be, he's still got quite a bit of a journey down the road to recovery.
You've got to think that his teammates are just so excited, like raring to be able to see him.
And I'm sure he's excited to try and see them again. You know, the football players are extremely close.
Yeah.
To call them family is perhaps even understated. It's because of especially because of what they've gone through here. So yes, the players want to see him. He wants to see them. Here's what quarterback Josh Allen said about that. Take a listen.
Coach gave us the last couple days off, and I think that was good for guys to kind of get away and, like you said, mentally reset. Demar hasn't left our minds, and we're still praying for him, and, you know, we want to continue to see him get better each and every day.
The Bills have a big game this Sunday against the Dolphins in Buffalo, and there's speculation about whether Hamlin might show up, perhaps in a luxury box, perhaps on a video tribute on a screen or something. Who knows? Perhaps in person. We'll have to see. But that will be quite a day as well, as have the past many days that he has made this journey and gotten healthy in record time. It's just been miraculous, and probably a lot of it has to do with the fact that he is a top-level athlete. His body is in great shape, and were it not for that unfortunate hit, he'd still be out there doing wondrous things on the field.
Ron Allen, great points, great reporting. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being with us. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, officials in France say 6 people were hurt in a stabbing attack at a busy Paris train station this morning. 1 person was seriously hurt. Police ended up shooting the attacker. He is now in the hospital. No word yet on any motive here. Number 2, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, has replaced the commander leading his forces in Ukraine just 3 months after giving him that job in the first place. The change comes as Kyiv warns Moscow is planning a new offensive strategy. Number 3, the Biden administration is extending the COVID public health emergency again. It's going to last until April. It's happening as a super contagious Omicron variant is spreading fast. What does this extension mean? It lets public health protections and money keep going a few more months to help people out. Number 4, you know how on this show last night we told you about the controversy over a Mael Organics hair product, rosemary oil? Well, today we're learning that Procter & Gamble, P&G, is buying Mael, buying the brand. The company was founded by a husband and wife team. They're apparently going to still be leading the company. One of them told Essence they have no plans to change any of their formulas. Number 5, tennis superstar Naomi Osaka. Have you heard about this? She is pregnant. Look at this. She posted a sonogram with a letter she wrote to fans. She said she's looking forward to her kid watching one of her matches and telling somebody, that's my mom. Osaka withdrew from the Australian Open over the weekend. People were surprised. Well, now you know why. She said she hopes to be at the one next year. So listen, do you like cooking on a gas stove or an electric stove? You probably, if you cook, have a strong opinion about this. Most people do. It is also now the latest political football on Capitol Hill. If you're like, why? Here's the deal. The chair of the Consumer Product and Safety Commission raised some concerns when he said the gas stoves found in millions of homes could end up being banned if they can't be made safe, quote unquote. The White House today says President Biden does not support banning gas stoves, but GOP lawmakers on the Republican side have said they're concerned about potential federal government overreach. There is a critical reality check you should know about. Any kind of ban would only have included new construction. But again, what's fueling the concerns here? No pun intended. Here's Zinkley Esimwa with more.
The safety of in-home gas stoves is sparking a political battle in Washington.
The president does not support banning gas stoves.
On Monday, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission Chair Richard Trumka Jr. saying to Bloomberg, quote, products that can't be made safe can be banned when asked about gas stove safety. The statement sparked swift backlash from Republicans, tweeting, get your hands off our gas stoves. Democrats are coming for your kitchen appliances, and calling the suggestion a weaponization of the federal bureaucracy. The commission since clarifying, tweeting, CPSC isn't coming for anyone's gas stoves. Regulations apply to new products. The commission declined our request for interview, saying they don't want to, quote, amplify this story that is a non-story.
Gas stoves are used by about 38% of Americans, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Are gas stoves safe?
You know, and that's a question we don't really have a solid answer for. And what they're recommending is further studies to find out.
A recent study by the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health finding 12.7% of current childhood asthma in the U.S. may be linked to gas stove use. 9 states and Washington, D.C., plus 94 local governments currently have policies that move away from fossil fuels and toward all-electric power in buildings, according to environmental protection nonprofit RMI. The American Gas Association releasing a statement saying concerns over natural gas safety are baseless and misguided.
What do you recommend to individuals like myself who have a gas stove?
Well, first and foremost, don't be afraid of your gas stove if it's working properly. Make sure your vent hood is working and is venting properly outside of the kitchen. Now, number 2, if you're cooking, and you can, especially in the summertime, open up some windows to get some ventilation.
The commission on Tuesday adding that any action to regulate appliances would be a, quote, lengthy process, meaning for now, regulation of gas stoves remains on the back burner.
Zinkley, is there any indication that this may end up on the front burner again? In other words, if this, if there is a desire for health reasons, et cetera, to get away from gas stoves, what does that actually look like? Understanding that this has, as you say, been backburnered a bit.
Yeah, Hallie. So Commissioner Rich Trumka Jr., who made those controversial statements to Bloomberg, also tweeted that Biden's newly passed Inflation Reduction Act actually includes an $840 rebate to replace equipment like gas stoves. So for those people who maybe want to switch from gas to electric, that is an option available right now. Hallie.
Zinkley Asimwa, thank you very much. Appreciate it. When we come back, the calls are coming from inside the House and inside Congressman George Santos's own party for him to step down. He says, we've got more on that. Plus, what we're hearing from Kevin McCarthy today in the local. And you won't believe what one woman is doing, or maybe you will, to try to make her prescription drug costs cheaper. We'll tell you about it in the original when we come back. To tonight's original now, with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And today you have the Health Secretary, Secretary Becerra, announcing a timeline for the Medicare drug price negotiation program. What does that mean? They say it's going to lower health care costs for people who are on Medicare and lower the cost of some medications that are pretty expensive. Americans spend on average about 22 cents of every health insurance dollar on prescription drugs. That's more than any other category, including hospital costs or doctor visits, according to one estimate. Our own Dr. Akshay Sayal met one woman who's taken some pretty extraordinary steps, literally, to try to get her prescription drugs cheaper. Watch.
Christine Schackinger, who's battling cancer, diabetes, and other medical issues, can't survive without her medication.
I have 12 I take every day, some more than once a day.
Lately, trying to get her new diabetes medication isn't a simple trip to the local Las Vegas pharmacy.
You're going to Mexico to get medications that your doctor says you need.
Yes.
The jump in price upset her.
She said it was $585, and I was like, what do you mean $585? It's covered. And she's like, no, they only cover $60.
For her, the cost savings in Mexico, huge.
Down there, it's $50 to $60 a month.
Do you think that's sustainable?
I don't have an option to get it any other way. I can't afford on top of the $1,200 to $1,500 a month I pay now.
About 3 in 10 Americans say they don't take their medications as prescribed because of cost. Stacy Dusetsina, a health policy professor at Vanderbilt, coined the term pharmacoequity.
Everyone should have equal access to the best treatments and the treatments that they need.
She says insurance coverage is a key factor in fair prescription drug pricing.
We know that people with lower wage jobs often have health insurance that requires them to pay a lot more upfront before their health insurance kicks in.
But the issue goes beyond insurance coverage. These 10 drugs had substantial price increases in 2021. For 7 of the drugs, they didn't find clinical evidence of increased efficacy to justify the increase, according to the independent nonprofit Institute for Clinical and Economic Review. And while there's multiple variables in drug pricing, it cost Americans an additional $1.2 billion in annual drug spending that year. NBC News reached out to the companies making these drugs for comment. Novartis responding, quote, "We take a value-based approach to pricing, which considers benefit to patients, caregivers, employers, the health system, and society." Amgen saying, quote, "believes that an incorrect assessment of net price increases and other methodological shortcomings led the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review to include Prolia." And Janssen responding, quote, "ICER applies a flawed methodology and represents the perspective of insurance companies, not patients." The pharmaceutical industry undergoing scrutiny over pricing in 2021 when a House Oversight and Reform Committee report found, quote, "without price hikes on certain drugs, companies would fail to meet revenue targets and top executives would have foregone millions of dollars in additional compensation." Legislators say there might be relief around the corner. The Independent Drug Value Assessment Act, introduced to, quote, ensure lower drug prices and greater transparency for patients and consumers. While it primarily targets Medicare recipients,
this is going to be very beneficial for people who are taking many drugs or who are taking a couple of expensive drugs. They're going to see a lot of financial relief.
For Schackinger, who isn't on Medicare, it doesn't go far enough.
It's just very difficult. Your whole life is based around your illnesses. Without the medications, for my heart alone, I would have died years ago.
And as she gets older, the fight to maintain her health within her monthly budget continues.
Dr. Seil is joining us now. Dr. Seil, it's good to see you. You described there how 3 in 10 Americans don't take the medication they should be taking because they're so expensive. You're a doctor. You treat patients. You prescribe medication. Have you ever had an instance, or does this come up, where you're trying to write them a prescription for something you know costs less? Like, how does it work in reality, in the real world where you exist with your patients?
Good evening, Hallie. You know, that's an excellent question, and it's unfortunately something that I've dealt with and most doctors I know have dealt with, where we're prescribing a medication, but the cost isn't always apparent to us, and it comes up, you know, further down the line. One example I can think of, you know, I had a patient not too long ago who had a blood clot in their legs and needed to take a blood thinner, but because of those out-of-pocket costs, it was a little bit of work to make sure that he could afford that medication. You know, he's talking about choosing between putting food on the table versus treating the clot in his lung, and that's obviously not something that a choice we want him to have to make. But to end on a positive note here, you know, with this Inflation Reduction Act coming up on September 1st, we're going to find out which 10 drugs Medicare has chosen to negotiate the prices with, and hopefully, it's a starting point to see, will these prices start to come down, and how can we apply it to other drugs going forward?
Dr. Akshay Seil, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Yeah. Coming up here on the show, some people in Illinois asked to shelter in place after a big chemical plant fire. What officials are now asking people to do if they see this green stuff that was released in the whole thing. That's in the local. Plus, Vince McMahon back at WWE. What his presence means for a possible sale of the company. We're talking about all of it next. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Midwest Bureau, big fire at a chemical plant in Illinois today. Look at this. This is what it looked like. It is now under control, but people nearby are still being told to stay home. They're also being told stay away from this green stuff that got released. They sent out like a legit recipe explaining how to deactivate it. A mix of water, peroxide, vinegar. I mean, that's something. Nobody was hurt. We don't know what started the fire still. From our Southeast Bureau, imagine getting on a train for a 17-hour trip and then having it be twice as long. That's what happened to some folks on an Amtrak train from the D.C. area down to Florida. The train left Monday but didn't get to its final destination until this morning. It got stuck in South Carolina after a freight train derailed. An Amtrak spokesperson says people on board were given food and water. One person told NBC he would have gotten off if he could, but passengers were told they couldn't do that. From our Northeast Bureau, Congressman George Santos facing new calls to step down today from people in his own party. Republican county leaders from his own district who want him to resign. The chair of the Republican Party in his state of New York wants him to resign. Santos says he will not, even after acknowledging, embellishing, or not telling the truth about where he went to school, what he did for work, etc. during his campaign. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy today says he's not going to push Santos to resign, but said he shouldn't be put on any top committees. WWE head Vince McMahon stepping back into the ring now to take over for his daughter Stephanie, as the company is looking to ride the sports media rights wave into a big payout if they put it up for sale. Stephanie McMahon is stepping down as chair and co-CEO of this massive organization after taking over when her dad retired. It wasn't like a big retirement party. He was essentially forced to step aside after allegations of sexual assault. But now, Vince McMahon may want to shed the heel image, be the hero, and be the one to sell the company. In a statement, Stephanie says she's confident that the company's in her words, perfect position to keep providing the product and drive value for shareholders. CNBC's Alex Sherman is going to help us uncorporate speak that and put it into plain English, right? Because in many ways, the WWE is a family business. Vince McMahon bought the company from his dad. McMahon may be trying to put on this comeback here, right? Maybe as they're about to sell for some big money with some big name people coming after them.
That's right. This is a family business, Hallie, but it's also a publicly traded company. And there's a reason this is happening now. The WWE's TV rights and its streaming rights are up in 2024, and those rights renewals will kick in later this year. So as those rights renewals are up, that would be the same timeline as WWE would want to consider a sale, because after they come to a new agreement with whatever TV networks and or streaming service would be carrying WWE, they'd be locked into those deals. So you'd have to get out in front of that and potentially sell the company before those deals are up. That leads me into who might be interested in buying this. Well, many of the interested parties would be streaming services that would be able to then own the WWE IP and have WWE as part of their services in perpetuity moving forward. Some of those are legacy media companies like our own parent company, Comcast, which owns Peacock, NBC Universal. That's who owns WWE rights today. WWE rights on TV are actually split between NBC Universal and Fox. So Fox you have to throw in there as another potential buyer. And then Disney and possibly even Warner Brothers Discovery would be two other buyers. The long shots would be someone like Netflix or Amazon. I mean, Netflix has never gotten in to live sports before, but This isn't your normal rental agreement. This would be actually owning the league, owning the IP. And that's something that Netflix may, in fact, be interested in.
Let me ask you this, because as I'm reading part of Vince McMahon's statement here, he's praising his daughter for stepping in during what he describes as his absence, saying she left an immeasurable impact on the brand. Vince McMahon is interesting here because he's not just a business person behind the scenes. He is very much part of the face of the WWE, almost like a character, right, in this whole thing. Is the expectation that he'll return to be like a part of the on-camera storyline? Yeah, he is literally a character. Mr. McMahon is part of the story, and that character has gone away for the past few months as Vince McMahon, quote-unquote, retired. Now he's unretiring. He's back as the executive chairman of the company. So I agree. I think it would not be a stretch at all to assume that he would once again become part of the on-camera presentation. There's been nothing official said on that. And the person who now leads the creative, which used to be Vince McMahon, is actually a former wrestler, Triple H, who's Stephanie McMahon's husband, his daughter's husband, so his son-in-law. So anything like that would have to be orchestrated between his real name is Paul Levesque, but Triple H is how people know him. He would have to come up with the storyline with Vince McMahon to return him on air. But certainly you'd have to imagine that that's possible now that Vince McMahon is back with the company. Alex Sherman from CNBC. Alex, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the show, a story that is seen by a lot of people as BANANAS. Gwen Stefani insisting she is Japanese in an interview. We are getting into the backlash next. Gwen Stefani finding herself in a bit of controversy now, to say the least, after an interview in Allure magazine where she defends her use of Japanese culture and says she's Japanese. To be clear, Gwen Stefani is Italian-American, but in this interview, she talks about being influenced by Japanese culture after going there, after visiting. She says, I said, my God, I'm Japanese, and I didn't know it. And then adding, I am, you know. She made this kind of comment in this interview more than once, and it so confused the Asian-American reporter and a colleague who were covering the story, doing the interview so much, they actually thought she misspoke. Stefani's rep later telling Allure that they'd misunderstood what Stefani was trying to convey, but the reporter wrote, I envy anyone who can claim to be part of this vibrant community, but avoid the part of the narrative that can be painful or scary. At one point, referencing the attacks against Asian Americans in this country over the last couple of years. Stefani's been criticized for appropriating cultures before, especially her Harajuku Girls era in 2004. Chris Willman, the senior music writer at Variety, joins us now. And Chris, in the interview here, Stefani is, she's defending her use of Japanese culture. She basically says, hey, it's okay to be inspired. But this reporter lays out that Gwen Stefani calling herself Japanese more than once, saying I'm Japanese, that's a different thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can believe that she did misspeak, but also not let her off the hook, because as she further explained herself, she still seems very kind of naive about why this has even been a controversy. And it's going back like a 15-year-old controversy that she somehow revived. Right. This came up when she first started appropriating Japanese culture in the mid-2000s, and even had like a perfume line based on her background dancers who were Japanese American. And so it was a controversy then, and and you would think, okay, she's had since 2005, 2008 to think about this, and instead she's making these statements. And I don't think she meant to say that I'm actually racially Japanese. That would be misunderstanding her. But also it shows that she never really got it somehow after having had all these years to sort of think about why it riled people up in the first place. And I think one thing people don't like to see in these sort of quote unquote cancel situations is when the artist or performer doesn't really even seem to realize why they got in trouble in the first place, as she has over the years before this.
Chris, you make the point that this has been brewing since really 2004 in the Harajuku Girls era. The discussion and the conversation, though, more broadly, culturally, around cultural appropriation, just looked different in 2004 than it does in 2023, right? I mean, we are in a different moment now as far as awareness and as far as the conversations that were happening as a country about this.
Yeah. And I think what she may not understand looking at the interview is that no one's saying you can't be influenced by other cultures. Right. But when you're merchandising it, that kind of crosses a line for some people. And she's had these merch lines, dolls, perfume bottles shaped like dolls over the years that have created, this kind of suspicion about how much she means to really capitalize on something that isn't her own culture. And, so the fact that she's like quadrupling down on it now when someone finally brings it up again doesn't reflect well. And so, I have some sympathy for her sort of being caught in a situation where, I think there are times where, somebody might say, like a straight guy might say, oh, I love musical theater, I must be gay. It's almost kind of that sort of thing probably in her mind, but she doesn't realize how offensive it is. And, the fact that she wasn't willing to clear it up is going to make things tough for her for a while, because it just seems like she's had all this time to think about it, and it never crossed her mind again until now. And this woman who interviewed her came in as a fan who is Filipina American, right, who had a lot of thoughts about how she worshipped Gwen, but then this affected that over the years for her. So it was the opportunity to have like a rewarding conversation about cultures crossing. Instead, Gwen just seemed very entitled and even said a hit is a hit when the reporter asked her about her line of dolls. So that's not, a hit is not really the response you want when someone's bringing up something culturally meaningful like that.
Chris Willman from Variety. Chris, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much. That's a wrap for this hour. More tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.